So they wrote in Jedi, and so the national religion of New Zealand is Jedi.
Jediism. Jediism. Okay. Well, that's the wrong screen because I don't use Windows. If I can help it. If I can get League of Legends running in Linux with Wine, hey, I can get most things running under Linux.
Did you get League of Legends running in Linux?
Yes.
I'm jealous.
Absolutely.
I'm considering, because
just look it up.
This was a $150 laptop, and everyone's telling me crap out Windows on it, put Linux on it. It'll be a much better laptop.
Well, I cannot guarantee that it will run League like efficiently, but I have a pretty medium and kind of medium low end i5 processor on my laptop, and it runs League of Legends just fine.
I'll think about it.
Yep. And meanwhile, my son and daughter are complaining about their i7 quad-core processor. It's like, oh, it's so much lag, la 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 la. It's like, oh, I'm chugging along just fine with my i5, dual-core processor, with no graphics card, nothing whatsoever.
Yeah, but what's the graphics card though? There's
just buy a server.
What's the graphics card though?
My daughter's computer used to have a NVIDIA built-in graphics card in the laptop.
Integrated? Oh, well then she's got a reason to complain about lag then.
No, but it's still better than the i7 built-in graphical GPU, because the built-in GPU is only good for decoding like DVDs and stuff like that. I mean, it's not intended for gaming.
Yeah.
Yep. And she had a quad core until she soaked it in salty water. Ooh. Then it died. She was having a sore throat, and you can gargle with salt water, and then she put it next to the computer, and then it flipped, so the computer died a pretty horrible death in salty water.
It drowned.
Huh?
It drowned.
It drowned. It shorted. Alrighty. So what we'll do today is we're going to look at more instructions, particularly during the lecture. We're going to talk about instructions that can change the flags and the conditional branch instructions. In the lab, you guys will be experimenting with the store, the load instructions. So we're going to do a dual-pronged approach here. But everything that we're going to do right now is to get familiarized with the instruction set as well as the processor. So that's what we are trying to do right now, because once we are familiarized with the processor as well as the instructions, then we can start to translate C code into assembly code. So that is where we're heading. So I'm giving you guys a map of the pine forest, even though we kind of have to focus on pine needles at times. So are we okay with that plan? Okay. All right. So we are getting back to this part here. Okay. Go back up a little bit. There we go. So tonight's lab is for load LDI, load immediate, and store. But in class, I'm going to write programs and code and explain how compare, add, subtract, and also all the branch instructions work. So that's going to be quite interesting, because this is how we have control structures in assembly language programs. There are no for loops, no while, no if, then else, nothing like that. You only got conditional branches, and that's it. Okay. So without any delay, we're gonna take a look at the processor first. Okay, so let me open up the processor itself. So it's probably a good idea for you guys to kind of have it installed on a thumb drive, so that you don't have to re-download every single time from the web. Or have your own laptop computer. How many people bring your own laptop computers to school? Okay, I think there is a little bit more than this. Okay.
Too afraid of getting stolen.
We get a cheapie.
I don't have a cheapie. I'm not smart.
$150. Do it at Best Buy right now.
True.
It does the job.
Yep. Well, as long as it gets the job done. The lower the processing power, the better, because you won't be tempted to play any games.
I tried. It lags dramatically.
Yep.
Stupid.
And that's the whole point. I mean, it's self-limiting, right? All right, so we'll get to the processor. Okay, so that's one thing. We're going to be running code here. And then the other thing is we're going to go take a look at the assembler, and we'll start to write some code, and then we'll test it. When we test, we're basically looking into the details of how it operates. So let's go to cisp310. Yep.
Are you recording the lecture?
He is. He pressed the button.
Well, just because I pressed the button doesn't mean anything is going to happen.
Well, no, because I got an alert stating that you were live, so.
Oh, okay. But the question is the audio on? Because that is the other thing. You know, I'm pretty sure it's on, you know, because I see the bar, you know, fluctuating. All right, so we go to shared, and then we go to assembler. And I'm hoping all of you have a copy of the assembler at this point, because you'll need your own in order to paste your own code into it. So here we have the assembler, and you know, we have a bunch of stuff here. Get rid of those. So remember, do not get rid of anything in column B. Even though column B looks empty, it is not empty. If you click on any cell in column B, it actually has formulae. So that's how we report error messages. So don't overwrite the column B, because otherwise, if you have an error, it's not going to report correctly. All right, so in column A, we're going to do some coding here. So we'll start with some comparison instructions. So we'll start with an LDI instruction here, because we need to compare something. Well, maybe not. I'll just do a compare instruction. It's comparing A with B. Okay, it's comparing just, you know, register A to register B. Compare AB is really the same thing as subtract AB, which is subtracting B from A, with the only difference that when you compare, it will go through all the motion of subtracting, but it doesn't store the difference back into register A. But when you have subtract, which is SUB, it does store the difference back into register A, or whatever the first register is. So that's the only difference between those two instructions. And, well, maybe at this point we'll just have a halt instruction right next to it, which basically means, you know, we are not interested in, you know, going any further than these two instructions. Yep.
Maybe I missed it, but where does the difference, where is that stored, rather?
Where is the flags? Where are the flags stored?
Because the comparison is between A and B.
Yeah, we'll hard code something. We'll inject values into register A and register B before we start the simulation. So that way we can use the same program and just run it over and over again to basically look at the flags and go like, ooh, look at this, you know, the overflow flag is on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's
Okay.
not, so the value of register A and register B are not initialized in the code itself. We'll do that in the simulator.
Okay.
Okay? All right,
And
so.
will that be with like a CSV file like we did last time?
Yeah. Well, we can do it with a CSV file. We can also hand assemble this program because it's simple enough that we should be able to hand assemble it. So we're going to do that, you know, right now is to hand assemble this program. Assembling is basically looking at the mnemonic code. This is called mnemonic, and trying to figure out what is the binary bit pattern corresponding to each line of mnemonic code. Now, mnemonic code is cryptic in a way because CMP is compare, and that's because, you know, programmers are very lazy. They don't like to spell out C-O-M-P-A-R-E, and this is way before GUI tools can auto-finish typing for you. I mean, you guys have used Coblogs or Eclipse. Eclipse particularly is, you know, encourages laziness, right? I mean, you just type something, and if you don't remember the members, you just put the dot, scroll through, like, ah, yeah, that's the member that I want, or that's the method that I want, right? Once you select it, it will tell you how many parameters it needs, and it will prompt you and say, okay, this is the parameter blah, this is parameter blah blah, and so on. So, but this is before those days. This is, you know, during the days when you actually have to use punch cards to enter programs. So if you can save one character, it is significant. Okay, so I'm just continuing that tradition. So the CMP is compare. All right, so to hand assemble the program, you go to the opcode table spreadsheet, which is really just intended for people to read, and then you look for compare. CMP is compare, so we'll scroll down a little bit. Starting to rain. Okay, so compare is down here, And this is subtract, that's AND. Okay, compare is right here. So you can see the pattern of compare. Let me zoom in a little bit too. And go back to the row that we want to look at right there. Okay. So you can see compare has a binary code of 1110 and then XXYY. XX are the 2 bits to specify register X, which is a quote unquote kind of like a parameter. And then YY are the 2 bits to specify register Y, which is the second register. Each one can be A, B, C, or D. Register A is recognized as 00. Register D is recognized as 1. So if I want to implement the instruction that I mentioned earlier, okay, let me switch back to the assembler window. If I want A, B, what should be the bit pattern for XXYY?
0001.
Exactly. XX is 00 because that specifies register A, and then YY should be 01 because that specifies register B. Is that okay? In other words, even though the assembler gets the job done also, I think it is important for you guys to understand how to map between the mnemonics versus the binary opcodes. Okay? So that means this is because it's 0001, which is just 1 in hexadecimal. So the entire opcode is E, which is 1110, and then followed by a 1. So E1 in hexadecimal specifies compare A to B. Is that okay? The halt instruction is easy because it doesn't need registers. So when you look up the halt instruction, it's super easy because it's just 01 in hexadecimal. So are we doing okay so far with hand assembling code at this point? Okay, so I'll just assume that it is okay. If you do have questions, go ahead and ask. So we'll switch back to the simulator. I'm typing Control R on the keyboard just so that I reset the entire simulation. Then we go to the RAM content here, and this time because the program is so simple, I don't even bother to assemble and then download it. So we'll just hand enter E1 as compare AB, and then we have 01 as the halt instruction right next to it. Is that okay? You can also see that in addition to the editor, the hexadecimal editor, it is also reflecting the main content of RAM, so you can actually double check and make sure that you enter correctly. All right, so let me close this window. We are almost ready to run this program. But before we run this program, we kind of want to look at the register bank just to make sure that, okay, what is in register A and what is in register B. But because of the Control R, it resets everything, including the registers, and every single register is now reset to the value of 0. In other words, we're subtracting 00 from 00, which doesn't seem like very exciting, but let's run it. Okay, we'll check out what flags are going to be set, what flags are going to be cleared, and how we make those determinations in the ALU. So are we okay so far with this? Okay, so I'm intentionally keeping the 0000 values in register A and B in order to execute a program. So go back to main. We are now ready to run the program. And like I mentioned last time, when the microcode is at location 00, the first location, it is the fetch cycle. In other words, we're going into RAM to retrieve a byte that will be interpreted later as the opcode. Okay, that's the job of location 000. It is called the fetch cycle. The fetch cycle, I'm not going to point out all the details anymore, is using the program counter. So when you look at the program counter, it goes into this multiplexer, and according to this selection bit, input 1 is becoming the output. The output is going to the address port of RAM. RAM is selected. It is being read. So the output is now outputting E1. Okay, that's E1. And that E1 is going into the register, the instruction register. So the instruction register is right here. It is enabled, which means on the next rising edge, the instruction register will update to E1. That's the job of the fetch cycle. The fetch cycle is identical regardless of what opcode you're fetching. because it's universal. This is the mechanism to get the next operation into the processor. Okay, so right now I'm going to do a control T to have a single transition. And now we have a rising edge, and as a result, the instruction register is updated to E1. And the next transition, next control T, is going to have a falling edge. The falling edge only affects the microcode pointer, which in this case is going to be incremented. We talked about this last time too. So control T, you can see the microcode pointer is incrementing to location 1. Location 1 in the ROM, okay, this particular slice of microcode is called the decode part of the execution cycle. So we are decoding the opcode, which is pretty easy in this processor. All we are doing is we're copying the content of the instruction register as the most significant 8-bit of the microcode pointer, and then we add zeros to the least significant 4 bits of that same register. Okay? So that means E1 will become E10 when we put it into the microcode pointer. Is that okay? This is all stuff that we talked about last time, in details. So in this class, I'm just kind of mentioning it and skip all the details. So we'll have a control T right now, and see that nothing seems to happen. The program counter is incremented, by the way. The program counter is incremented when we are decoding, because once you have fetched the opcode already, that location is not useful anymore. So that's why we auto-increment the program counter, so that the program counter is now ready to fetch the next thing. Now, most of the time it is another opcode, but occasionally it is not an opcode. Occasionally it's a constant that we need to do something with. But we don't care what it is, okay? Because we just need to move past the location that we have just read. Is that okay? So now it's time for a falling edge. The falling edge would update the microcode pointer to E10 in this case, because the opcode itself is E1, so the start location in ROM for the microcode for that instruction is E10. So another control T, and you can see how this is now changed to E10. So now we are done with the first 2 steps of executing an instruction. We are done with fetch, we're done with decode, and now it's time to execute the opcode. When we execute the opcode, we just have to kind of follow this and figure out what it's going to do. So we'll go back into the main part of the processor, and we'll figure out, okay, so what is this going to do, which is the compare instruction. So right here, we can see that the ALU is active now. You can see the enable to the ALU is bright green. It is enabled, so the ALU itself is going to do something in this particular cycle. The ALU relies on its input and the operation selection in order to figure out what it is going to do. So we want to track down, first of all, what operation are we performing. So when you click on this wire, it is selecting 001. 001 is selecting basically the second operation in the entire ALU. So when you expand the ALU, you will see the operations that are implemented. This is the first one, which is labeled 0. This is the second one, which is labeled 1, and so on. So the way we activate which one, or the way we select which one is actually doing something, is using the op select, operation select line, which externally we also see as SEL, just SEL, I think. We can go back and check that one. But the operation is 1, and it's going into a demultiplexer. The same select bits are going to this demultiplexer, that demultiplexer, and the multiplexer itself. In other words, we are now feeding in 1 to the second operation, we're feeding in 2 to the second operation. The output of the second operation becomes the actual output of the ALU. Now this, the demultiplexers really do not need to be here, but it is implemented like this just so that we don't exercise circuitry inside the ALU unnecessarily. So only only one of them is going to be active. So we are not going to be consuming power unnecessarily. So right now we're doing a subtraction. This is the subtractor. The subtractor is subtracting 0. This is the subtrahend from 0. This is the minuend. Just as you step into the classroom, the rain stops.
Just lucky, I guess.
Review yourself, Thor.
You haven't made the yearly sacrifice. What do you think?
Thor, the god of hammers. That was the best line of the entire movie. Okay, so 0 minus 0. Okay, well, we kind of know what 0 minus 0 is. It is 0. Okay, so there's nothing really surprising here. But we also want to look at, what about the borrow bit? The borrow bit is going to be clear, right? But how do we get the borrow bit as the result of this operation? That is the question. So you have to follow this tunnel B. Okay, so we highlight this. And then we look for the other parts that are highlighted. The tunnel B is also fed into this multiplexer. This multiplexer goes to C out or carry out. So you can see this particular multiplexer is really only active, is only doing something useful for the first two inputs. Input 0, which is representing the carry after an add, and input 1, which is the borrow after a subtraction. For all of the other operations, it just copies whatever C in is to C out. In other words, it doesn't change anything. It's like, okay, whatever C in carry was is going to be the next. It's going to be the next value. It's not changing it because it doesn't make sense, to change the carry bit when you have a right shift operation, or a bitwise AND operation, or bitwise OR operation, or bitwise NOT operation. Okay. Okay, but the borrow bit is only one of the many bits that we need to track. Can someone name a few other flags that we need to track?
L flag.
The L flag. Okay, so the L flag, okay, we can go backwards because the L flag itself is a composite. So in order to understand the L flag, we have to get to this part here. This is our L flag. So the L flag is the result of the exclusive OR between the sign flag and the overflow flag. Okay, so this is the other way to look at this, is to look at these two. The sign flag S out, where is that? Whose sign flag are we talking about? So if you click on this wire, it will highlight everything that is connected to this tunnel. So if you scroll up a little bit, you will also see that sign S out, or sign flag of the output, is right here. This is a very interesting splitter. All it does is to extract bit 7. You can see how this wire is 8 bit wide, but this particular splitter is only paying attention to bit 7, and bit 7, which is the most significant bit, becomes the sign flag. Well, somebody said Thor, so. Son of Odin. Okay, so that's the sign flag. What about the overflow flag? Okay, we want to track down the overflow flag. So when you highlight the overflow flag, we got to zoom out a little bit here. We're looking for the thick wires again, and you can see the thick wire of overflow is right here. Okay, so that's overflow. It is the output of a multiplexer. So now we need to focus on this part of the circuit. Zoom in. And now we can see if we are adding, it is using this particular circuitry to compute the overflow. If we're subtracting, which is operation 001, it is using this circuitry to compute the overflow. So what circuitry are we talking about? Okay, it is using this is an AND gate of the negation of S1, non-negative version of S2, non-negative version of S out, or, this is the OR, the AND of the non-negative version of S1, negative version of S2, and negative version of S out. So now we have to track down, okay, we know where the sign flag is, right? So that's okay. But what about S1 and S2? So we click on those wires, and then we can track down where those things are connected. Okay, so locally that's how they're connected, but when you scroll up and to the left, you will see that S1 is bit 7 of whatever is the input. S2 is the most significant bit of whatever is the second input of the entire ALU. So this is how we get S1, S2, which are basically the most significant bits of the minuend subtrahend, and then S out is the sign flag of the difference, and then we just go through that computation. That computation is already mentioned much earlier when we talk about subtraction in binary. So it's the same thing.
Dude, cut it out.
Well, Thor got his mojo back, right?
You didn't like the hammer joke.
Yeah, he didn't like the hammer joke. Well, that's coming from his own father, so deal with it. So that's how we compute the L flag, but then the overflow flag, the sign flag, and the carry flag are on their own. And here's a zero flag, okay? The zero flag is, okay, how do we generate the zero flag? So once we highlight it, we can go back and search for it, and here's the Z out. So Z out is nothing more than the NOR of all the bits of the output. So if any bit of the output is a 1, if at least one bit is a 1, in the output, then Z out is going to be a 0. Z out is a 1 if and only if every single bit of the output are zeros. Is that okay? In other words, if the Z flag is a 1, the result of the computation is a 0. Are we good on that? Okay. All right. So now, when we look at all the flags, we can see exactly what they are. The carry flag, or the borrow flag in this case, is a 0 because 0 minus 0 does not need to borrow anything. The zero flag is a 1 because the result is in fact a 0. The sign flag is a 0. Well, that's kind of, it follows because if the Z flag is a 1, the sign flag has to be a 0. Don't you think? Because the sign flag is just bit 7 of the result. If all the bits are 0, that includes the most significant bit. The overflow flag is also a 0 because the sign of the minuend, subtrahend, and the difference, they make sense. Okay, there's no problem with that. So that's how we got all of these flags. So the L flag is also a 0 because it is the exclusive OR between the sign flag and the overflow flag. So this is the inside of the ALU. Okay, so when we zoom out back to the outside, we want to know, okay, so how do we update the flag register? Because the flag register has to remember all the flags. So this is the flag register. You can see how the flags as an output, flags out here, is going into the input or the D port of flags as a register. The flags register is enabled, and on the next rising edge, it's going to be updated. Okay, so it's going to be updated, and it will remember all the flags. Are we doing okay so far with this progression here? Okay, basically we are dissecting what the compare instruction is doing. So the next question is, what are being compared now? Because it is a subtraction, so who is the minuend and who is the subtrahend? So to understand that part, we have to track down the in1 and in2 as the ports. So we first track down the first one. It's coming from a demultiplexer, which means now we have to find out, okay, what is the demultiplexer enabled? The EN of this demultiplexer is enabled. It's bright green, it is enabled. Okay, but what are we selecting? Now this one is a little bit harder to see because if it's not a single bit, you can't really just look at the color and find out. So we have to click on this one. It is selecting 0, 1 as the output. So this is 0, 0, this is 0, 1. So the output of this demultiplexer, in fact, does go to in1 of the ALU. What about the input? Because the demultiplexer has one single input and has multiple possible outputs. The only input of this demultiplexer is out 0 from the register bank. So whatever we are selecting as out 0 of the register bank is feeding in 1 of the ALU. Is that okay? So now we go in. We track down which register are we selecting in the register bank. This is register output 0 select, and if you look into this wire, it is selecting 0, 0, which is register A. So register A is output 0 from the register bank, And because of the demultiplexer, it is routed to the input one of the ALU. Is that okay? There's a lot of details, but so there's a lot of tedious stuff going on right now, and as I explained, but none of those steps is difficult to understand. It's just a lot of things happening. Okay. What about into? So we now track down into. This is into right there. So into, oops, click on the wrong one. This is into. Into is a little bit more cumbersome because it's coming in from the output of the multiplexer. So we have to first figure out, okay, are we getting input 0 or are we getting input 1? Well, for this multiplexer, because it only needs 1 bit to select which one of the input becomes the output, you can look at the color code and find out which one is selecting. So this dark green wire is connected to the gray dot here. So that is basically saying we are selecting input 0 to become the output. So now we have to track down this wire. This wire is coming out of the multiplexer. And now we have to track down, okay, which output is active in this demultiplexer. The selection is 1, this is output 0, this is output 1. So this output going into is in fact active, okay? But what is going into this demultiplexer is out 1. It is output 1 from the register bank. So now the question is, what are we selecting to become out 1 of the register bank? And that turns out to be, so you have to go to R01 cell, which is register output 1 select. You click on that one, it's 0, 1, so that means we are using register B as out 1. Okay? So that completes kind of the whole story. We are using register A as in 1. We're using register B as in2. In 1 is the minuend, in2 is the subtrahend to perform the subtraction. But we are not storing anything back because you can see en, input enabled, is not enabled. So we are not going to store the result or the difference. And we're only going to set the flags. Are we doing okay so far with this analysis? Okay, all right. So we'll go ahead and do a control T, a rising edge, which means the flag register is going to be updated. Can't really see the rain, not when it's.
I can see the puddles drifting around.
Yep, you can see the ripples, right? You can probably see people running too. Now in Hong Kong, we have people live in residential buildings are like 50, 60, 70 story tall, and they flex. The buildings actually flex in strong wind. Some people can sense it. I could not sense it. I used to live on the 11th floor. My aunt could sense that the building is swaying from one side to another side, but I couldn't sense it. But if you live up to like 50th floor, you will sense it. You will actually feel the building to be swaying like that.
Jeez.
Yep.
It's a new feeling.
Yep. It's kind of fun, because you take your escalator up, like 50, 60, floors to get home.
Wow.
Yep. So this is how we perform a subtraction. So the result, or the only thing that is affected by this subtraction, are the flags register. It doesn't store the result anyway. Is that okay? That's how we compare. All right, cool. So after the compare instruction, are there any questions about what we just went through in this particular simulation? Because if you have any questions, this is a good time to ask. Yes?
So there's more than one type of flag though that it's storing, right? Or
It
is
has
just
5 different flags.
5 different flags?
Yep. So when you go to, so the way you track it down is you can see how the value of the flags register is coming from this wire, right? So in terms of the positioning, this is the second port on the right-hand side of the ALU. So what we do is we look into the ALU component like that, and then we just count from the top. What is the second pin from the top. This is the first pin. That is not a pin, that's a tunnel. So we look at, this is the first pin. Scroll down a little bit. These are all tunnels. This is the second pin. So the second pin is the flag register output.
Okay.
And that's how we can determine that only bit 1 is set because it is reflecting a 0 flag.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? So understanding the processor is really a process of exploring the whole thing and then just trying to figure out, okay, what is feeding into this, how do we control this multiplexer, how do we control that multiplexer, and then just track down everything. You know, just going backwards or forward. Either way is fine. Okay, you can start with the end and go like, okay, how do we get something into this thing? Or you can start with the beginning and say, okay, where is this output going to? Okay, so either way works. That is a rain. It was like this at about noontime when I had my CISD 440 class. I think that's hail. Yep.
Well, there was lightning, so usually it's hail with lightning.
Yeah, because it's extreme atmospheric turbulence to do that.
It's not good either.
Hmm?
It's not good because it's gonna knock the it's gonna knock the flowers off the plants. It's not gonna be a good crop.
Ah, but I have a soft top. It's just bouncing out. Okay. So are we good so far with the analysis of the processor, with just the compare instruction? Yes.
So the flags, they just cycle through. They're never really stored. They're just looked at to finish the calculations that the doing, right?
Well, the subtract instruction or the compare instruction only sets the flags. It only changes the flags, but it doesn't read back what the flags are.
It only does that during the computation, right?
Once it's remembered, it is remembered. Okay, so let's check this out. Okay, so let's go back to main, and we'll finish these subtract instructions. So another Control T will do a falling edge, right? Because I think we are. Yeah, the clock is high right now. So another Control T is going to have a falling edge. The falling edge is going to increment E10 to E11, which is 2 followed by all zeros. And then last time we talked about how 2 followed by all zeros is going to reset the microcode pointer back to 0. So that's why the moment I type Control T on the keyboard, it's going to go back to location 0 and try to fetch the next opcode. Okay. So Control T right now. And you can see how it just got back to location 0, 0, 0. So this time we're going to fetch location 0, 1, which also has a content of 0, 1. So it looks kind of confusing because the content is the same as the address. 0, 1 is the whole instruction. Okay, so once we quote unquote execute the instruction, it doesn't do a single thing. So we'll do a Control T, and you can see how I can clock all day long, and it doesn't change anything. But you can now go back to the flags register. And you can see the flags register is retaining the value of 02 because it's a register. So it's not something that's transient. It is going to be there until the next time you have an ALU type instruction that will change the flag register. It will maintain its content. Does it answer your question, or am I answering a different question? Okay.
So I'm asking, is there any way to access that other than during the actual computation?
Access means reading or writing?
Reading.
Reading. There are only conditional branch instructions that can actually make use of those flags. Okay. So that's the next thing we will talk about are the conditional branch instructions. But that's a good question because we have those things in the flags register. What are they for? Why do we have those things? So that's a very good question. It's a good lead in to the next topic. So are we okay so far with all of these things that I just talked about? Are there any questions about the process itself? Okay, when I explain how everything works, are there any questions about the process? How do I track down, oh, the ALU is active. Okay, that's because of the EN. But how did I track down what is supplying in one and what is supplying into the ALU? What are we doing to the output? Are we storing anything? So are there any questions about that part of how to track down in a particular cycle what is going to be updated? questions? All right. As kids, did you guys enjoy those maze problems?
Yep.
Okay. Well, that's basically what it is. With multiple trains on the island of Sodor. Sodor. S-O-D-O-R. That's the name of the island in Thomas Train.
Oh yeah.
Thomas the engine.
Yeah, tank engine. Thomas the tank engine, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I still remember the tune. I'm not gonna hum because I cannot sing. Yeah.
All I know about the tune is that apparently, because it's the way that the meter works, it goes well with almost any rap song. I think the lyrics of any rap song put the Thomas the Tank Engine and it works.
Oh wow.
Okay. What is the difference between? Okay. Is there any relationship between hip hop and rap?
Yes.
Hip hop came first, and then rap is a derivative. Kind of like ska led into reggae.
Okay.
It's kind of a
Kind of like
progress.
how
Blue,
rock and
jazz,
roll, yeah.
that whole
Yeah.
family thing. So they're related because one comes first, and then there's a derivative to become the second one.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Hip hop is now outlawed in China, by the way.
Oh, I can't go now.
Because the president of China decided that hip hop is a foreign influence to the Chinese people, so now it's outlawed. In other words, the 99% of people who did not know what hip hop was now know what it is and want to check it out and go like, what is it? Okay, somebody play something.
We already tried to do this back in the 70s.
Whereas before, nobody cared, right? Oh, listen to this, it's hip hop, it's cool. I'm not interested. Now, everybody wants to go. They're like, oh, I want to check it out. What is it? Why can't we listen to it?
They tried to do this in the 70s with classical music and it didn't work. They were executing people for just knowing how to play Beethoven.
Yeah, and the same guy is removing his term limit, his own term limit.
He already succeeded.
Yep. They had a meeting with all the representatives. 3,000 people, are the representatives representing all the provinces and whatnot. I think 2 people voted no, and then quickly fled the country.
Right.
Okay, the second part I made up.
And mysteriously disappeared.
So either they fled the country or they disappeared. And then there are like several votes of abstain, probably pretending to be sick because they don't want to be. They don't want to vote either way. So they have 2,990 something votes out of 3,000 to say yes to remove term limit. It's interesting, not related to this class, but it will have an impact to the entire world in about 10, 20 years.
No kidding.
But that's okay. This is what we learned from 5,000 years of written history in China.
Repeat the same mistakes over and over.
Yep,
and
exactly.
over.
They learned absolutely nothing. The cycle just begins. It's just like with the processor. Clock high, clock low, clock high, clock low.
The first thing is the dictators, outlaw history books. You can never.
Yeah, then the country breaks apart into like local factions, and then they have war with each other, and then strong leader comes in. Everybody's yearning for strong leadership, and then everything consolidates. Everything looks good for a while. And then the guy wants absolute power, and then the whole cycle begins again.
So this time with nuclear bombs.
Well, I got other things to say, but I'm not going to say it. Okay, so next we're going to look into conditional branch instructions. So this is where things get really, really cool. Or obscure, depending on how you look at it. All right, so we're going to look at these instructions, and this time we're going to have a compare, but we'll have a conditional branch instruction next to it. Okay. Let's see how we're going to do this. So we're going to have a conditional branch instruction. I'm thinking about which one, which flag do you guys think is the most difficult one to work with? Like to figure out is it going to be a 1 or a 0. We'll pick the difficult one. Borrow, overflow. Okay, we'll do overflow then. So JOL, okay, JOI, sorry, immediate. To a particular label, we'll just call it label 1, L1. And then we have to define L1 at some point. So we'll have a halt instruction here. and then label L1 will have another halt instruction. Okay, so in other words, whether we branch or not, we're going to hit a halt instruction. Okay? The conditional branch instruction, JOI, do not pronounce it as joy because it is not.
Ouch.
It's jump if and only if the overflow flag is set with immediate address. Okay, that's what JOI stands for. So what it is going to do is, in this case, it will go to label L1 to continue execution if and only if the overflow flag is set when this instruction executes. If the overflow flag is cleared, if it is a 0, it will just continue with whatever is right next to it. That's what it is supposed to do. Okay, so are we okay so far with the concept? Okay, cool. So we'll go ahead and try to arrange 2 examples out of this one. One where it does branch. In other words, we'll make the overflow flag set, and then in the next one we'll make the overflow flag clear so that it's not going to branch to label L1. Instead, it will just continue with whatever is next to it. And the idea is we want to look into the mechanism of the processor and understand how it is implemented. Okay? All right. So this one is a little bit more cumbersome, so I'm going to go to the RAM file tab and just kind of copy and paste this, or save the file and then load it into the simulator. So download as, comma, separate the value. I don't really like it doing this, so I'm going to change the settings so that it will actually ask me. So go to settings, and let's see, where is it? There's one part that deals with downloading. I guess it's under advanced.
It's not a browser option, it's a Chrome option?
It's a Chrome option for sure. Yeah, it could be under content setting. Okay, cookies, location, camera. They keep changing, you know, where they put things, so it makes it automatic download. There we go. Okay, ask when a site tries to download files automatically. Yes. Nope, that is not automatic. It's not that setting. I'm just going to be lazy and try to find it here. Location. Oh, ask where to save. Okay, cool. Turn it on. Okay, now it's better. It's kind of strange when there are so many settings where you have to search to find out, you know, where it is. Okay, so that's good because now I can save it one more time, but this time I can control the name and where to put it. So we'll go to download as CSV, and it's asking me. Cool. So we'll say let's call this joi.csv just so that the name matches what it does, and then switch back to the simulator. Control R to reset the entire thing, and that will include the RAM, which is okay because we're going to load it with new content anyway. Go to load image, go to the temp folder, and then locate that file joi.csv, open. Okay, so now we got the code. We are ready to run with one more thing that we have to do. Do we want it to branch or do we want it not to branch? It's up to you guys. To branch it? Okay. So in order to branch, we have to set it up so that it would overflow. So we have to go to the register bank and pick 2 values, one in register A and one in register B, so that we would actually end up with an overflow. Okay. What do you think is going to work in this case? Remember, overflow means we are running out of values to represent the result in the sign interpretation. So if I subtract 1 from 80, that should do it, right? Because 80 in hexadecimal for an 8-bit number is 1 followed by all zeros. That is the most negative value they can specify, which turns out to be negative 128. So if I subtract just 1 from it, it should be negative 129, but negative 129 cannot be represented as a signed 8-bit number. So that should trigger the overflow flag to be a 1. So that's 80 here, and a 01 over here, and that setup should work. So we go back to main, and I'm gonna double check the program itself. E1, okay, that looks good. So we'll now single cycle through the whole thing. The compare instruction is already done, so but there's no way to set up a breakpoint, so I can't really say, okay, do everything at full speed and stop here. Okay, so there's no ability to do that in this processor. So we just have to be kind of careful. So you can observe a few things. You can observe what opcode we are going to execute. So so this is the other thing that you guys can do. Okay, just talking about resources available. You can go to the assemble window, and then you can scroll like this, so they can figure out what is the JOI instruction. The JOI instruction has an opcode of 42 in hexadecimal, which means as long as the opcode is E1 in the instruction register, I really don't have anything to worry. But when it changes to 42, then we have to kind of stop and single click slowly. Is that making any sense? Okay. And we also know what the address is, because we know that particular instruction is a location 01. So that means I can also observe the program counter. When the program counter is 01 and the opcode 42 is loaded into the instruction register, then we pay attention, go like, okay, now let's check it out. Okay? All right. So all of these things are, I explain these things to help you debug your programs later on, because you're going to need to understand how to debug your program, because it's not like debugging a C program in code blocks. Okay, there's no breakpoint, there's no printf, there's no C out or C in. So when you debug a program, you really need to rely on these things in order to debug the program. All right, so it does make teaching a class difficult. All right. So I'm just going to do what I said a little bit earlier. We'll observe the instruction register and also the program counter. When the program counter is 01 and the instruction register is 42, then we slow down and pay attention. Okay? So we can say Control T, 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 Control T. Okay, now we pay attention. The first thing is we want to check the flags register. Make sure the overflow flag is indeed a 1. Okay? So we scroll up a little bit, and the flags register has 18 in it. So 18 in binary is 11000. So which one is corresponding to the overflow flag? You can't really see very clearly here, but if you go to the ALU, that is where you can see it kind of more clearly. All right, so there we go. So you can see, okay, let me magnify because we can see how the bits are allocated. Okay, so when you look at these numbers, they are corresponding to the bit numbers. And we have a 11000 here. So we have a 1 corresponding to the L flag. We have a 1 corresponding to the overflow. So the overflow flag is in fact a 1 at this point. Is that okay? Yep.
Why is it red?
Why is it what?
Red?
The reason why it is red is because it's the output of the gate, but the input of the gate is undetermined. So it is not, this time it's not because of a bus contentions, it is simply because it's the output of the gate, but the input of that particular gate has some unknown inputs. So I did not really quite decide what the output should be. But it's okay because it is not going into any register that's going to be changed. The flag register is disabled at this point, so the input can be anything, it's not going to affect it. All right, so now that we have seen this, we can go back to main and zoom out just a little bit. And this is the fetch cycle of the, it's the fetch cycle of the JOI instruction because we can see that the microcode pointer is not 420 yet. So we can now Control T and then Control T one more time, two more times, and now we are at the location 420 in the ROM. In other words, we are now executing the JOI instruction, which is also where the fun stuff begins. Okay. All right. So now we have to go through the same stuff that we talked about earlier, but this time our focus is going to be the program counter, because any type of branch or jump instruction is changing the program counter. That is how we change where we go to continue execution. Okay, so the first place to look is going to be the program counter. So we look at the program counter, which is right here. Okay, that's our program counter. Currently it is 02, and we are expecting it to change in a certain way. Okay, so now we say, are we changing it in the next rising edge? Yes, we are, because the enable is a 1. So now the question is, how are we changing it? So we have to look at the input to the D port of the program counter is coming from the multiplexer. The multiplexer is controlled by PC mux or PC multiplexer, which has a value of 1. But that value of 1 is not from the ROM itself. Okay, it is actually computed. So we want to check it out and say, okay, but how do we compute this? Okay, so we click on this wire. PC mux is also used here, but that's okay because that's just another use of PC mux. And you can see how PC mux is all of these thick wires here. In other words, PC mux is the result of PC mux mux and all the inputs into PC mux mux. PC mux mux is PC mux mux because it is the program counter multiplexer multiplexer.
Can you say that 10 times fast?
PC multiplexer multiplexer times 10. But that's why we have times 10. Right? That's why we have multiplication, so we don't have to do silly stuff like that. All right, so PC mux mux itself is a selector. It's a 3-bit selector. That one does come from ROM. Okay, so it has a value of 0, 1, 1. So that means input 3 becomes the output. This is 0, 1, 2, 3. This is input 3, which turns out to be the overflow flag coming from the flags register. So we are basically saying, okay, let's look at the overflow flag. That's what PC mux mux is saying. Let's look at the overflow flag. The overflow flag, whatever it is, if it's a 0, the output is a 0. If it is a 1, the output is a 1. Is that okay? Okay. So that's why PC mux is a 1. So now we go back to the program counter, and then we ask the question, if PC mux is a 1, what are we using to update the program counter? So we go back to the program counter, and then PC mux is known to be a 1 already. So PC mux being a 1 means we are choosing input 1 of this multiplexer to become its output. So now we have to track down this wire. That wire, in return, comes from another multiplexer. And this multiplexer has a selection bit that is based on the AND of PC mux and the negation of RO0EN. RO0EN itself is a 0 at this point. We are not using register output 0 from the register bank, so that's okay. PC mux is a 1, so we have 1 and not 0, which is 1 and 1. And that's why the output is a 1. So now we look at input 1 of this multiplexer because that is feeding into the other multiplexer. So we track down this wire, and you can see how this wire goes everywhere. I think we have seen this wire before from Monday. Can you guess where it's coming from?
RAM.
Yep. So it's coming from RAM. Okay. And you can see RAM is selected at this point. We are saying, okay, RAM, pay attention. And not only that, we are reading from RAM because the load port is specifying a 1. So that means whatever the output of RAM is going into the program counter now. Is that okay? But then the next question is, who is specifying which location we should be looking at in RAM? In other words, now we have to track down a port, the A port of RAM, and find out, okay, who is specifying that location. So we click on the wire going into the A port or the address port, It's coming in from a multiplexer. The selection bit is a 1, so that means we're looking at input 1 to this multiplexer, and then we track it down, and it is the program counter itself. So, dun dun dun. So we are using the program counter to tell us which RAM location we should read. Whatever the content of that location is, we use it to put back into the program counter. So that is how we implement the immediate operand, which basically says wherever we are branching to is specified by the byte next to the opcode itself. Is that okay? So this means if we look at RAM, okay, it specifies location 04. So that means the program counter will update to 04 right away. It's not incrementing through 03. It goes to 04 right away. So we're going to be stuck with the halt instruction at location 04.
Instead of location 03.
Instead of location 03. So it does go through the branching. So the rest is really just Control T and just observe that the program counter changes to 04, and then it will change to 05, because remember the fetch cycle, right after the fetch cycle, when we decode, it auto increments the program counter. So when you look at the program counter, most of the time it is 1 more than the location of the opcode that you're executing.
So essentially the jump instruction is carried out by the program counter.
Yes, by changing the program counter.
Right, that's what jumps it.
Yep. So now we are stuck in location 04, even though the program counter says 5, but we are actually executing the halt instruction at location 04. But when you go back to the assembler, that will make it clear which halt we are talking about, because when you look at the so right here, this is location 04, and this is the halt instruction that we're executing right now. So the branch did occur. Is that okay? Are there any questions about the JOI instruction and how it gets the branching part done? No questions? Are there any questions about how I track down everything? Now I know some of you are thinking, well, Tack, it is your design. Of course, you know where things are going. Well, if you know my memory, you would not make that assumption. My short-term memory is like this much. In today's processor term, I have about a few hundred bytes of level 2 cache.
Do you get excited about the same pebble twice?
Sorry?
Do you get excited about the same pebble twice? Turn around
Pebbles.
and see it again.
Well, if it's a pebble that I can wear, yes. Yep. Fitbit just came up with a new model, and they say, oh, finally, they reinvented the pebble. Cool. All right. So what if it doesn't branch? What if the overflow flag is a 0 and it is not branching? So before we talk about that, let's talk about labels, okay? Because I don't think it's going to be a big problem, but just to make sure that we understand what labels are, L1 is a label, and the definition of label is the same syntax as in C and C++, where you specify the name of the label, which is any identifier name that you can use in C or C++, and then followed by a single colon. That defines a label. A label is nothing more than a symbolic name of whatever is next to it, whatever is following. So in this case, L1 is the symbolic name of the address of the halt instruction. Is that okay? All right. So now we can go back and do the simulation again, but this time we'll go ahead and see what happens when the branch does not occur, and how does it know that it has to execute the next instruction instead. Okay. So we go back to the simulator, we do a Control R, which will wipe out RAM content as well, but that's okay. And then we just reload the program. So we go to load images and joi.csv, click open. But this time we have to make sure that register A and register B, when they do the subtraction, it does not trigger the overflow to become a 1. Well, that's easy, because 0 minus 0 does not trigger overflow. So that means we can now just clock it or give it edges until PC is 0, 1 and instruction register is 4, 2. So we just do Control T. Just do it slowly, okay? Okay, so right now it is already, I think I might have stepped it a little bit too much. I don't think so. So in the ROM, okay, we are just about to decode, so I didn't click too much. So decode, and now we're at location 420 again. But this time we'll try to figure out what's going to happen. You look at the program counter. Once again, it is enabled because whether we should branch or not, whether we should branch to L1 or not, it is going to change, okay? Because it has to either increment or to change to whatever the next location specifies. Okay. So now this time when we look at PCMux, you can see the PCMux this time is a 0. It was a 1 last time, now it's a 0. But that is not surprising because we already know how PCMux gets its value. PCMux gets its value because of PCMux. PCMux did not change. It is still the same instruction, so it's the same microcode from ROM. So that's why PCMux, which comes straight from the ROM, is still 0, 1, 1. In other words, we're still looking at bit 3 coming in from the flags register, which is our overflow flag. But the flag value itself is changed. Overflow is 0 in this particular case. So, but we can see that because it is 0, the output of this multiplexer is also 0. That is what is feeding PCMux to become 0. Is that okay? So if PCMux is a 0, we go back to the program counter. How is it going to update itself? We cannot just say do not change, because if it doesn't change, then we'll attempt to execute the byte right next to it as if it is an instruction, which is not the intention of that byte. So when you go back to the program counter, you can see that this time the multiplexer, which is selected by PCMux is a 0, so we're going to use input 0 to update the program counter. Input 0 is the output of the adder. The adder is in fact adding. That's because address mux is at 1. And that's the reason why we are adding 1 back to the program counter. The program counter is now at location 02. What is at location 02? Let's go back to the assembler and see if we can figure that out. At location 02, right there, at location 02, it is a 04, which is where we are supposed to go if overflow is a 1, was a 1. Okay, it is not a 1 this time. But 04 itself is not an opcode. We really should not be fetching 04 as if it is an opcode to try to execute it, because that's not the intention of the byte with the content of 04. The next instruction is at location 03 with a value of 01. So that's why we have to increment the program counter 1 more time to skip over this particular byte, because otherwise we'll be executing that byte as if it is an opcode, which is not what we really should do. So when we have a rising edge, the program counter PC should update to 03, which means we are just sequentially following the order of execution. Whatever instruction is next to the JOI instruction, in this case the hold instruction, is going to be executing next. So is that okay? Do we understand how the conditional branch instruction works? Okay, so there are several questions. One is how it works, but if you step out, one level, if you zoom out a little bit, the next question is what does it do? There's the how does it do it, and then there's what does it do. So what it does is actually easier. Okay, it's a conditional branch. In other words, if I were to translate JOI into C syntax, it is going to be something like this. All right, so JOI to a particular label L1 is really doing the same thing as in C syntax. If the overflow flag is a 1, go to L1. So these two are basically quote-unquote equivalent constructs. One is in C, the other one is in assembly language. Now I know you're not supposed to use go to in your C and C++ class, But in terms of what it does, this is what we're doing. Because if the overflow flag is a 0, we are not executing the then statement. But this conditional statement doesn't have an else, which means if the condition is false, we just execute whatever is next to whatever is following the conditional statement. So from that perspective, the C construct and the assembly code, they mean exactly the same thing in this case.
And so that's why the bit next to our opcode has 04 in it, because it's representing that go-to line.
It is indicating where we're supposed to go.
Well, yeah, which is the go-to part.
Yes. In order to specify where we're going to continue execution, the 04 is for that purpose. That is correct. So are we good with the conditional branch instruction? Yes? No? Okay. This is how we're going to implement all the control structures in C and C++. All the loops, all the conditional statements are going to be implemented this way. Now, calling subroutines is going to be a little bit more complex, so we'll talk about that later. But when we're talking about just if then else statements, while statements, do while, for statements, it's all going to be like this. We got 5 minutes, so I think that's just enough time to give you some exposure of how to do loops, in assembly code. So we'll go ahead and do something relatively simple. And I'll just assume everything is done in registers, so we don't have to worry about loading from RAM, doing something, store it back into RAM, and that kind of stuff. So this is just pseudo C code. Okay, so I will say, as long as register A is less than register B, and I have to say whether it's signed or not. So we'll say they are signed. Okay, so register A and B are in fact signed. And then we have in register C, which is initialized to 0. Okay. Oops. Right there. And the loop doesn't do a whole lot. Okay. This is all we're going to do in the loop. We'll say C gets C plus B. Well, C plus A makes it slightly more interesting. Not by a whole lot. And then we have auto increment A. Okay. So we are basically keep adding 1 to A until A is no longer less than B. Okay, and then for each iteration, we're also adding the value of A to C. Okay, so now the question is, how do we do this in assembly code? The first one is easy. How do we initialize C with a value of 0? This is based on the instruction that we talked about on Monday. Which instruction did we talk about on Monday? Load immediate, very good. So LDI C with a 0 is going to initialize register C to 0. Cool. And then with a loop, you have to have a label to mark the beginning of the loop. So while begin is going to be a label. You also need a while end as a label to say, okay, when we do need to get out, we need to get there. Okay. And then the compare of A and B is just CMP-AB, which is a subtraction that does not store the result. Then the next thing is the tricky part is, okay, we need a conditional branch instruction so that we can get to label while end if and only if A is less than B signed. The good thing is we have the L flag, right? So this one is going to be a JLI, okay? Jump if the L flag is set to the label called while end. If not, what do we do? Well, if not, we're actually in the body of the loop. So in the loop, the first thing we do is we add A to C. So we say add CA because the first register is the one storing the result of the computation. And then the next thing we need to do is to add 1 to A. We do have an increment instruction, which is just adding 1 to a particular register. So increment A will get the job done. And now we need a unconditional branch back to the beginning. Because this is a loop after all, so we need a way to go back to the beginning. So this shows you the comparison between C code, which is the one on top, versus the assembly code, which is the one at the bottom. So what do you think? Can you deal with this for 8 weeks?
Probably.
You don't have a choice.
You can always drop out.
You don't have a choice, not because of me, but because every assembly programming class is going to do this. It is not just the toy processor that has this kind of instruction. Every single processor at the lowest level only has conditional branches that can do something like this. If the flag is 1, go. If the flag is not 1, continue. That's the only decision making you can do at that level. But in this class, not only do we know what the conditional branch instruction would do, but we also understand how, or at least one way that it can get it done using the internal gates of the processor. So are we good so far? Okay. Now, the weekend is kind of long because we are not going to meet for 5 days. So that means you're going to have time to read stuff. Okay. I know it's an assumption, but we'll just make that assumption for now. Okay, so if you have time, go ahead and read compiling C control structures, because now that we have covered conditional branch instructions, that is going to be the next topic. It is not complex, but it does require some understanding of what it is doing and how it gets it done. It's very mechanical once you understand it, okay? But understanding what it is and the logic behind it can be the part that is consuming time. So I would read this one over the weekend and just kind of go back and talk and just re-examine the instructions that we have talked about already, which is the LDI instruction, the conditional branch, the unconditional branch instruction that we talked about today. And also in the lab today, we'll talk about the LD versus the ST instruction, the load versus the store instruction. So all of those, you know, in the end, we are basically piling stuff on top of each other. So there's no way we can say, oh, you know, this is something that we talked about last week, we don't need it now. Nope, from here on, it's all cumulative. Okay, so we'll go ahead and I'm gonna shut down and head out to the lab. But if you don't want to be caught in the rain, you might want to wait here until I'm done and move on. It's difficult to know when it's gonna rain again.